Manager of Alumni and Donor Experience for the UC Alumni Association. Thank you for joining us this morning for UCYP's How Curiosity Fuels Adaptability webinar. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. This event is going to be recorded and it will be made available for you all in a post-event email that will go out within the next few days. Also, you have entered this event on mute, so if you could remain on mute until we get to the Q&A portion of the presentation, that would be greatly appreciated. You will be able to unmute yourself when we get to that portion. You are also able to use the chat feature. If you would rather send questions there, I'll help monitor that so I can help facilitate Q&A as well with Brody when we get to that point. Before we get started and I pass it over to Brody, I'm going to share a quick video from Jen Heisey, the Vice President of the UC Alumni Association.
Welcome to today's program, one of many offered by your UC Alumni Association. Before we begin, it's important for me to say thank you for joining us. By actively participating in our offerings and experiences, you are harnessing the power of your alumni network. There are Bearcats all over the world, more than 315,000 alumni in 127 countries, which makes virtual programs like this so rewarding. These challenging times do come with a silver lining. We are more connected than ever before, creating boundless opportunities. The University of Cincinnati and each of you is stronger and better positioned because of our lifelong connections through our alma mater. We love providing opportunities like this one, where alumni can learn, network, and give back. So settle in and enjoy today's program. And if you like what you hear today, please share it on social media using the hashtag #ThyLoyalChildren. Thanks again for joining us. Go Bearcats.
Okay, and Brody, I'm going to pass it on over to you. Go ahead and get started.
All right, welcome. My name's Brody. I feel like I'm sitting on a Delta flight, like somebody just told me that I need to fasten my seatbelt, and it felt very much like one of those videos. I was waiting for like punchlines or her trying to be funny, throw a few jokes in here and there. So as I mentioned, my name's Brody. This will be fairly casual. I always get kind of nervous about these presentations, but then I realize this is content and material that I think about all the time. I don't say that in like a overly arrogant way, but these ideas are floating in my head daily. So I think I could probably do this with my eyes closed. I'd have enough to say. So that kind of helps calm my nerves. I want to get to know a few of you, or all of you. It's kind of nice. There's just a small group. So the chat, I'm going to open up my chat so that I can see. If you can just throw in the chat where you are tuning in from. So are you at home? Are you in Cincinnati? Are you at the office? I can see the chat here. Don't be shy. Home, Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky. Anybody else want to disclose their location? Naples, nice. Lauren and I were just talking about how wonderful it is in Florida right now, especially with this weather out here. I'm in Cincinnati, home in Norwood. That's right down the street. We're in Pleasant Ridge. And then real quick, why are you here? Why did this headline or this webinar appeal to you? Cool, Maryland. Why did you show up today? Or what drew you to it? Other than me presenting, of course. Anybody want to share why they showed up? It'll help me because it gives me some context, and then I can actually speak to why you're here. Changes due to COVID. Oh, and that it can actually be good. That change can be good. New learning environment, thinking how you can do your work differently, and then job search in the future. We'll talk about that a little bit. Thank you, Dr. Hutchinson. Anybody else want to share while you're here, why you're here? COVID adjustments. Yeah, everywhere. You know, we think about adaptability. We'll talk about adaptability and how thinking about and trying to force ourselves to adapt is usually not very helpful. It's not very effective, to be honest with you. And we're going to talk about how do you kind of attack something like adaptability from a side door or from kind of a different angle, a different perspective. So I'll tell you a little bit of adapting in my life. I teach at UC. I'm a professor there, and I'm used to being on campus. I don't love being on campus. So actually the change to remote learning was sort of welcome for me. I'd rather have the freedom and flexibility and autonomy to kind of teach from wherever I am. Right now, you're looking at my attic. We finished our attic about a year or so ago, and we were going to do Airbnb up here. And as you can imagine, Airbnb didn't happen. And now it's become my office. So I'm adapting to that. I also have a standing desk. So I felt like if I want to be successful, I need a standing desk. I need kind of a comfortable atmosphere. I sometimes have back problems. So I've tried to adapt in those ways so that I can be successful in this time. And as I mentioned, I'm gonna go through a few slides here, if I can get away from this annotation. Maybe I need to reshare. Bear with me for a moment. Okay, this works. So thanks for introducing yourselves. I'll introduce myself and my family. Can you see my screen? Give me a thumbs up. My wife is Julie, and we've been married for 16 years. Our daughter, Poppy, is going to be 7 in February. And as you can imagine, a lot of joy and a lot of missing teeth, even more missing teeth since that picture. And then our daughter, Remy, is 2.5. And she is a lot of energy. If anybody's curious, I always think it's kind of fun and interesting. It may be obvious that Remy's adopted, and I always have a few students in class who will say, "Hey, I'm adopted too." So it's been wonderful. We actually have what's called an open adoption, which means that we have a relationship with Remy's birth mom, and we see her every few months, which is really great for us and for Remy and for her birth mom. So that's my family. And since I'm a proud dad, I'll show you some more pictures too. We went to an apple orchard this summer. And one of our former Airbnb guests, because we did Airbnb years ago too, sent us a fruit basket. So that's the fruit basket from an old Airbnb guest. That's our kitchen. Some people care about a professional biography. Some of you don't, which is fine. You can tune out for a minute. If you care, or you feel like context is important, or you feel like credibility is important to you, my education comes from a few places. One, my undergrad's from Miami University in urban planning. Then I worked for a few years, and then I went to the University of Michigan to get a degree in higher education. And then since working at UC, I've gotten an MBA through the College of Business. So I finished that a couple years ago. So I had, 5 to 10 years in between each of my degrees, which is how I like to do it. And even now I'm taking a class at UC, a journalism class actually, because I want to be a better writer. My career path is different. And this kind of goes into some of the content today, I don't have a typical professor career path. I was in college student programming. I used my urban planning degree to work for a land developer for a little while. I sold loans to doctors who wanted to start practices. So that was business lending. I worked in a startup, and then I'm a professor now. My focus is workplace motivation. I do some talent management. And my teaching philosophy, I tell people I teach career development. I teach career education, but really what I teach is more about self-awareness. So how can we understand ourselves and our behaviors in a way that will inform the way that we make decisions about our careers moving forward? I have some different certifications in things like StrengthsFinder and the DISC assessment. I know some of you might be familiar with MBTI. So those are things that I kind of dabble in and I actually utilize with my students in the courses that I teach. So talking about adaptability, people are talking all over the place, just even in the chat this morning. I need to be more adaptable. People tell me I need to be more adaptable. If you look at headlines on whether it's Forbes or Wall Street Journal or look at any magazine, Inc., everybody's saying adaptability is the critical skill that you need right now. The challenge is that just telling somebody to be adaptable doesn't work, right? It's kind of like when you say, I need to be more empathetic. Or if I tell my sister, or if I tell my 7-year-old, you need to be nicer to your sister, right? That probably won't work. Just the way that our psychology works, we can't just be more adaptable. We can't just be more patient. We have to figure out different ways to attack the challenge or the opportunity. So that doesn't work. It's also like when you're feeling anxious or you're feeling stressed and you just say, I just need to stop feeling anxious. How many people have tried that? And it doesn't work. I need to stop being so stressed out. Instead of stopping feeling anxious and stopping feeling stressed out, we need to think, well, what are some ways I could change my behavior? Or what are some ways that I could actually think about my strengths and my skills that would help me be less anxious or less stressed? So those things don't work. So instead of saying be more adaptable, there's a different way that we can approach our current reality, which is needing to be more adaptable. And it's to awaken curiosity. So instead of thinking, I need to just be this other thing, what am I already good at? What do I already do on a normal day-to-day basis? Well, I'm fairly curious. And all of us have curiosity. We all have fascinations. There are things that we're just kind of fascinated by, our interests, our strengths, our skills, and they're unique to us. So you're going to be interested in different things that I am. You might, I have all my students do kind of an intro video at the beginning of the semester. And students are saying, I'm really into plants, or I'm really into knitting. I'm always surprised, what students are into, and it's great. And I want to help them take their fascinations and their interests and turn them into questions. Turn them into questions that will help them think about their career path moving forward. And there's a poet who I really like. I've tried and I've succeeded to get into poetry a little bit. His name's David White, and he talks about beautiful questions. How do we develop beautiful questions? I know sometimes we feel like somebody says, kind of like, be more adaptable. Like, I need to be more creative, or I need to be curious. The good news is that we're all curious. We're just curious in different ways. So we need to kind of own the ways that we are curious and figure out how we can utilize that to our advantage. I think about my 7-year-old and 2.5-year-old and the experiments that they're constantly conducting. Little kids are like scientists. They're trying new things. They're testing new things. They're endlessly curious. They have questions about everything. Kids get to that age, 2, 3 years old, and it's just question after question after question. And in our life journey, that 0 to 10 age, it's just more and more questions. We want to understand how our world works. 1, we're just generally curious. But 2, we are starting to want more predictability. Kids run experiments because they want predictability. If I do this, then this will happen. But we're asking questions and we're thinking about it and we're playful. The challenge comes when we hit our adolescence And you notice that I put up to 25 because there's more and more research that shows adolescence moves into mid-20s. And we move from the side that is more possibility and experimenting, and we move more towards certainty. And that's not necessarily bad. You know, we want security, we want to get really good at things, we want comfort. The challenge or the thing that we run up against is when we want quick answers. When we want to press a button and it just says, here's the answer to this situation. I've got a new job, or there's a new role, or I'm changing a process at work. There's got to just be a simple answer to this. And the reality is that there's not, or we need to be more playful to figure out how to do it. So I call it, and I've heard this term before, the tyranny of certainty. You know, if we're constantly striving for certainty and security and predictability and mastery, we're not going to be able to adapt in the way we need to be successful in that next thing. So it could be the next job, or it could just be a new role or a new process in the company or the organization we work. And it shuts down our curiosity. If we're constantly wanting certainty and we're constantly wanting to know what's next, it leads us to dead ends, to be honest with you. It leads us to thoughts like, I've never done this job. I don't know how to do this job. How will I work from home? I've never done it before. What'll happen if my company downsizes? I'm going to be in trouble. You know, if we're looking for knowing the next step and knowing everything and how it's going to turn out in life, it usually is not successful, because that's just not the way the world works. Another thought is that I need to be perfect to be successful. If there's a new role, if your boss comes to you and says, hey, we're getting rid of this department, but there's this opportunity over there. Sometimes our first instinct is to say, well, I don't know how to do that. Or I can't be successful because I've never done it before, right? So today we're going to focus on mystery rather than mastery. There's a book called The Artist's Way, which can help unlock some curiosity and artistic ability in you if you're curious. But the idea here is, when you have a challenge in front of you, or the requirement to actually change and adapt, we need to focus on the mystery of it rather than mastering it or feeling like we need to master it. So getting back to the beautiful questions. Again, the good news is that we all have them, just like we all have curiosity. But they're questions that are unique to us. And what we want to do today is to figure out that you walk away today having a couple questions that you can ask about your circumstances. So if you need to adapt in a specific way, what are the questions and the curiosities that can help you adapt? David Whyte, again, I'm going to bring that poetry back into it. He, in one of his poems, he talks about what it would look like to grow younger toward death. You know, as we get older, to be thinking more like children do, to be open to opportunity, to be excited about newness, to be experimenting. Because the truth is, we thrive when we have the comfort of routines, we have some consistency, but we also have the openness to surprise. You know, if our life is a total mess and it's just curiosity all the time and we never settle into anything, that's not good either. But the problem is, we focus more of the time on the certainty and the routines and the predictability, and we miss out on being open to surprise. And being open to surprise is where new solutions come from. And being open to surprise is where joy comes from. So how can we be in a place where we can develop beautiful questions? They happen often when we're patient and when we're present. I don't know how many of you are practicing some sort of mindfulness, or mindfulness through yoga, or any kind of practice that helps us be more aware and more present. There's more and more research that shows the more present we can be, the more satisfied we can be, the more creative we can be. Another thing is to be open to chance encounters. You know, unfortunately, chance encounters are less and less in the face-to-face world. You know, you would go to the grocery store or taking walks and talking to people, or go into a restaurant, you run into people, acquaintances, and beautiful questions come from that because you weren't expecting it. They kind of surprise you a little bit. And that happens in the digital world too, but maybe not as much or just a little differently. And on the flip side, other than kind of the positive, be present, be patient, we also can find beautiful questions when we're afraid or shy or nervous. That's kind of the dark side of this. But it's not really dark, because what it does is that it helps us, if we're shy or we're nervous. How many of you have heard this phrase? If you're not nervous before you give a presentation, then there's something wrong. When we're nervous or when we're shy, it means we care about something. So when we come up against that new challenge, that new job, that new process in the office, if we're not a little bit nervous, it's probably a sign that we need to think about it differently. So these beautiful questions come up when we kind of practice this patience and being present and open to chance encounters, and to pay attention when we're shy or we're nervous or we're afraid. So we're trying to convert this anxiety, this kind of addiction to certainty, and convert it to opportunities, right? So we've got challenges. We need to adapt. We need to do this thing differently. We need to look for a job. We need to get a new skill. We have these assumptions. I'm not good enough. I've never done this before. We've got fears and irrational conclusions. And we need to rethink it and reframe it. And we want to move toward, it's a possibility. It's a possibility to do this differently, to bring my skills into this position. Maybe the last person did it this way. I'm going to do it this other way. It's a chance to shine, to say, I've got this skill or strength, and I'm actually going to try to utilize that strength in this new position. It's an opportunity to satisfy our curiosities. Let the way that your mind works keep working that way. Keep asking the same questions, but in a different context, and reframe the challenges. Every time this annotation thing happens, then I lose my ability to control the screen. Thanks for your patience. All right, that works. So we're going to do an activity right now. So if you have pen and paper, or pencil, or colored pencil, or you've got the notes on your phone, the notes app, wherever you can write it down, we're going to take a few minutes and get some participation going here. It might take more than 3 minutes. And the question we're trying to ask is, what are your unique curiosities? So you don't have to share with other people. I see that one person already left. When I said we have participation, somebody pieced out. I know that happens. You don't have to share with anybody else. This is personal. It's going to be just for you. So think about, what are you fascinated by? Just generally. It could be, we got a bird feeder recently, and I'm amazed by birds. Maybe it's just because I'm getting old. But thinking about the different types of birds, how they behave, identifying them, that's kind of fascinating to me. This can be anything. What are your fascinations? What are your skills? What do people tell you that you're really good at? What are your strengths? So thinking about strengths in terms of behaviors, how do you typically behave? You may have taken Strengths Quest or a different assessment. I think about my life. One of my strengths is ideation. I'm pretty good at just coming up with lots of ideas. So if somebody says, hey, I've got this problem and I need to try to solve it, I'll say, have you tried this or this or this? It's easy for my mind to go and create ideas. So what are your strengths? What are your interests? I mentioned something like birds, or sewing, or whatever it might be. Your interest might be history. It might be historical figures. Some of my interests are getting more into poetry. Thinking through, are there certain poets that I like? Or what does poetry have to teach us? And then frustrations, kind of like the being shy or being afraid or being anxious, and that being an indication of something you care about. What do you get frustrated by on occasion? Or I should say normally, almost a daily basis. One thing that I do with my students, instead of saying, what do you value or what are your personal values? That's one of those questions that's almost impossible to answer. Reframe it and say, what frustrates you in life? Because whatever frustrates you in life is probably pointing towards something that you really care about. So it's figuring out, what do you care about based on the frustrations that you have? So we want to allow these curiosities to lead to questions about the challenge that you're facing. So your skills, your fascinations, your interests, your frustrations, how can those actually help you address this challenge in front of you in the way that you need to adapt? There's a book that I really enjoy by an author named Parker Palmer, and he asks this question, what are you always doing? So what I mean by that is, do you always find yourself analyzing? Do you always find yourself observing? Do you always find yourself listening? What is it that you are always doing, no matter the situation, no matter the context? For me, it helped me think through years ago, before I started teaching, I'm always teaching. Not that I'm always telling people what to do, but I'm pretty consistently in my life learning something and then sharing it with someone else or helping somebody through the process of learning. So you might be always improving, always learning, always listening. What is it that you are always doing? I'll give you a minute to think about that, because it's not a question you're often asked. What is a behavior or a way that you see the world that you're always doing? So now we've talked about some of your fascinations and your interests. We've asked a question, what am I always doing? Because that can be a good indicator of how to address your adaptability. And then what am I always asking? So when I look out in the world, when I look at a relationship, when I look at my job, are there questions that consistently come up in my mind? Some of them could be, what skill could help me do this better? If you're a person who likes to gain skills and you feel like gaining that skill helps you to accomplish your goal, that might be a question that you're always asking. What skill could help me do this better? These are just examples. You'll come up with your own, or you can borrow one of these. Some people are really good at making things more efficient. How could this be done faster? That might be you. That you look at situations or the world generally and you say, I think this could be done faster, more efficiently, better in some way. Maybe you're somebody who's really good at understanding customers or understanding other people. So maybe your common question that you're asking is, what does the customer think about this? What does the student think about this? What does the user think about this? And that could help you address your challenge. You could be really into data. What does the data say? So if you're moving into a new position, or if you have to change the way that you live your life, if you're starting to work from home and you've never done it before, and you're stressed and you're thinking, how am I going to adapt? If you're a data person, start doing some research, right? Start thinking through, what does the data say about working from home? Because I trust the data. And then another one that I've kind of brought up through this process is, what do other disciplines have to say about this situation? What would poetry have to say about it, or history, or anthropology? I've taken something, I've got this presentation about curiosity and adaptability, and I've thought through, I've been reading a lot of poetry. What does poetry have to do with being adaptable? We often don't link those very often, but you could be into microbiology. What does microbiology have to say about your challenge that you're facing? So be thinking about questions that you're often asking. So we're going to wrap up with this activity. I want you to leave with something practical. So your situation that you're facing might be a new position or a new title. It might be that you've taken on new roles and you're expected to do something differently. You maybe have an internal process that's changed as a result of COVID or a result of things moving digital or whatever that might be. You might be managing working from home for the first time, or some of you are getting ready to go back to the office, because that's happening too. So you got used to being at home. Now you got to go back in. And that's stressing you out a little bit because you're thinking, I just got used to waking up and going to work in my pajamas and my kids being right downstairs, but that's changing. So we're thinking through what 2 questions can you ask based on your unique curiosities that will help you address your current challenge. So you need to think about what is one thing that you're adapting to right now, and what 2 questions can you ask that will help you be more adaptable in that situation. And I'll put some examples down here. It's kind of rephrasing some of those questions that were on the last slide. What's going to help you adapt? Ask the question, is there available data that could help me? How could this task be done more efficiently? Or this process be improved? Is there a certification that I can gain? I like learning. I like gaining new skills. What new skill could I gain that'll help me in this new role? Would talking with our customers inform our next step? If we've got something to adapt to, should I create a survey and start gathering information from customers? If you're adapting to working from home or working back in the office, what typically helps me manage stress? Think about when I was at home, it was good for me to move around a lot. Now I'm back at the office, I should probably take a couple walks every day. So we're moving from, I've got these challenges that seem impossible to overcome, and I don't have the skills that I need, and I don't have the resources that I need, to saying, what am I already good at? What questions am I already asking? How does my brain naturally work? And how can I let my curiosities help me address this situation? So hopefully you've come up with 1 or 2 questions that are unique to you, specific to your skills and your strengths and your fascinations, that are going to help you take a little step forward in becoming more adaptable. I think we're still on time.
Yes, we are.
Okay, we've got a little bit of time for question answer, and you are free to ask me anything. I don't know if Lauren, you want to control this time?
Nope, you're good.
So anyone can throw a question into the chat. Or just, Lauren, did you say that people can unmute themselves now?
Yep.
Most people stuck around. That's a good sign. We didn't lose too many along the way. How many people were able to actually come up with a question or 2 based on their curiosities? Maybe we can put that in the chat. What's the question that you're going to be asking about the way you need to adapt? Did you come up with a question or 2? Hopefully you're going to leave with something.
I came up with a few.
Yeah.
A big thing I have to do soon, Brody, is work with some strangers virtually who I've never really worked with. We're doing here at Siemens, where I work, we're doing some self-service enablement for all of our digital tools across our company, and we've never really done it that way. We always had support staff and like people helping others get on board, especially our managers and people in charge. So like in this virtual environment, like I'm just trying to think through what other disciplines, sort of like you suggested, say about getting strangers on board on something totally new that might not make them so happy, right? Like our older employees tend to not like these kind of changes because it puts working with technology in their hands more than others, and more than they're used to. So I'm going to be spending the next week reading up on like some cognitive science or like things I wouldn't really thing to look at when doing this kind of training, rather than doing it from my perspective or like how I would want to do it. I think that'll help.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny how our minds kind of bounce to different resources and thinking through how do you get people's buy-in? How do you get people committed? And we can learn that. We can learn that through anthropology. You can learn that through cultural study. Like, how do you get people to buy into cultural norms? There's all kinds of different disciplines that could inform how we do business. I thought it's kind of maybe sick and twisted, but it's like, what do cults do? Like
my mind went there right away. Like, how did crazy dictators get like entire cultures to follow them, right? Like,
exactly. How do you get people to actually change their behavior or follow you? And a lot of times it could be through charisma. Not that you necessarily want to do that, but it could inform how you approach the challenge.
You would be a great cult leader, Brody. I'll say.
Oh, thanks.
I've known you for a while. you would be fantastic. And that's a compliment.
Yeah. I think the fact that my mind does work that way sometimes, I need to like rein it in, so that I don't become one.
That's funny.
Anything else? Anybody want to share?
Brody, it looks like there's something in the chat.
Okay. I'm trying to think what's the first one from Dr. Hutchinson?
Yes.
What do I do consistently, and how do I think about things? Help me realize I do like to create efficient systems. I'm an educator in a postdoc role. Yeah, it's thinking through. There's a lot of people who are really good at looking at situations and saying, how do I make that better? That's just the way that your mind works. That's not the way my mind works, but I'm glad there are people like you, Dr. Hutchinson, because you make things better. You make them more efficient. You make them less expensive. You make them more effective, which is great. And we need to lean on those things, the ways that our brains work already, instead of trying to be something we aren't. And then Laura says, how do I make my job work with less people or staff? Laura, what do you feel like are your common questions or your general curiosities? What could help you figure that out?
Well, the thing is, like, the workload will be the same, but I'll have a whole lot less people. So, or less student support specifically. They're looking to possibly cancel this lab class, which is my workforce. So instead of saying we can't do this, I'm trying to look on how do I make this happen. So, asking for, okay, well, if we don't have students working for me, then I need some, maybe 2 staff people working for me, or can we pare things down, make things simpler? I work in costumes, so like, could we do less builds, rent more things? Mm-hmm. So I was pretty disappointed at first, but now I'm trying to figure out, okay, this can't work, and now I'm trying to figure out, well, how do we make it workable?
Yeah. I think a lot of people are in your similar shoes, not the same, obviously, but thinking through, do we need to adjust the expectations of what our production even is? Or are there other ways to do this? Are there other models that are out there? Thinking through, because you're not the only one in this situation. Are there other universities? Are there other labs that are working differently, with fewer resources? Maybe there are models out there of labs that have very little funding, but somehow they produce really high results. I don't know, but just if you're somebody who likes to research, maybe the research piece, to learn about other models, other examples that are out there could help inform moving forward. try to scroll back up here. How do I manage my stress? I've been loving it at home. Little breaks can be productive. Ariel, are you required to go back into the office now?
Yeah, I mean, not quite yet. I think we have another month or so, but we are eventually going to go back. And in the meantime, they've also completely redone the office, so it's not even going back to the same cube or, office space. It'll be redone, people moved around, so it's a little bit of change on top of change.
Yeah. What are your curiosities or strengths? What questions could you ask to help you prepare for that change? Because you've got about a month, right? I think it's smart to think about it now.
Absolutely, and that's definitely something I want to explore. I wasn't able to answer all of them now, but I think it's something that I want to try and have out to remember, so that I remember, think during the day and try and notice some of my thought patterns and see if I can kind of decipher some of those things. I know things like planning the night before versus, so at some point during the day will help, things like that. So just house planning in general, but definitely I want to explore those thoughts for both this and in general.
Yeah, we got some crowdsourcing here. Laura says that she requested and received permission to take breaks during the day to take walks. And she asked permission, and it sounds like she got it. So it may be part of an ask work.
Right. And I'm fortunate not to be micromanaged. So I think walks definitely will be part of it. Obviously, that's more exciting thought when it's not freezing out.
Yeah.
Definitely pausing. Although I'll miss, here, you can just go do the dishes or take the meat out or whatever, things. It's so much more useful when you're not stuck in a different location.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
Just briefly, a friend of mine on a webinar like this recently called it breaks with intention. And I just really liked that approach. There's like a whole discipline. You can probably Google it somewhere, but just on little tips that maybe people don't think about on how to make maximum use of their time when you have 10 minutes or 15 minutes to spare.
Yeah, I think even shifting your tasks or bundling tasks or things like that. There's a lot of research that shows if you go from like a mindless kind of entering data and you've done it for long enough, if you just switch to something that requires you to be more creative or be more thoughtful, that can really be helpful moving forward in a workday as well. We've got another question. Can you simply share idea exchanges as broadly as possible and not be so concerned about the ownership of the ideas? Could you, I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, Ruan? Can you share a little bit more about your question?
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Basically, the whole notion of creativity or curiosity and adaptability and almost applying it in a real world setting. And gosh, I guess sort of setting up or formulating the process or pathway for pulling a lot of interdisciplinary resources and concepts into into almost like a grant proposal type of thing, but initially to carry weight of weight of moving the idea and concept forward. You basically have to reach out to sort of subject matter experts and rely on their giving the green light, almost endorsing the idea, and maybe adding to the success of the heavy lifting that might be involved.
Yeah.
A little bit challenging to even present the rough idea in this context, but again, I just thought if you had a general
Yeah,
on the approach in general, and again, I'll take the conversation another time out of the presentation context, so it doesn't bore other people.
No, it's good. I think I understand what you're saying. There are some organizations, like some foundations that provide grants even, who are more focused on like an interdisciplinary approach to solving problems.
Okay.
So one example, I don't know if anybody's listened to a podcast or a radio show called On Being with a person named Krista Tippett. And Krista Tippett kind of thinks about spirituality and culture and anthropology and all of these different social and life sciences. And she's funded by one organization called the Calliopeia Foundation. And I think one of their taglines is like, we want to bring together all these disciplines to address problems, like bring in the environment and spirituality and all these other disciplines, and how do we think about it in a way that is more creative and more holistic. So I know that there are organizations out there, because I've thought about trying to get a grant from one of them. But usually it seems like they have their own interests in mind. They have their own funders. So if it's like Eli, she's funded by Eli Lilly too, because they want to like improve the lives of people or whatever it is. But you can look at some of those organizations, those foundations that are doing more interdisciplinary work.
Okay. So to draw this subject closed, basically almost like go ahead, be bold and reach out to them directly and try to establish a dialogue and hope for the best.
Yeah, look at the work that they're doing, and maybe you can think through how could you contribute to the work that they're doing. Mm-hmm. That's a different way to approach a relationship. Instead of saying, what can I get from you? If you approach them and say, hey, this is the work that I do, I think it can maybe contribute to your goals and your interests. It opens up a little bit more of a real dialogue, a mutually beneficial kind of relationship.
Sure. Okay.
But I think they'd be open to it. And then it's really their job to gather the experts rather than you having to go out. Like that's part of what they do,
Okay. Great. Thank you for your input.
Yeah. And Anthony says that he would love to talk to you about it. So he mentioned in the chat, so you guys can connect.
Oh, okay. Great. Thank you for that input as well.
Did we miss any other questions? Yes. As an international student, adaptability is the key to live more freely in a new cultural environment. Yes, that's well said. I care about judgments coming from people when I adapt. I'm constantly worried if I act awkward or stupid, did something wrong, get anxious. What's your advice for me as an international student? I mean, I have a lot of respect and really appreciate the struggle and the challenge that international students face. It's real. Those cultural differences, they bring stress. There's nothing else that you can't argue that. I think it's really trying to figure out in our lives, in any cross-cultural context, what is it about this situation or about this difference in values or behavior or culture that seems to be you don't want to necessarily adapt just to adapt, Like you might be adapting to something that you don't agree with. So I think the challenge becomes, what's that tension in your life of feeling like there's a new way that it's done in this country or in this culture. Is that something that I agree with? Is it something that I don't agree with? Rather than just, I'm gonna do all the things that are done in this country. You know, there's a lot of talk right now about white supremacy, and thinking about white supremacy, just because people talk in a certain way or dress a certain way doesn't mean that we need to adapt or to conform to that. You know, some people would say, who are really pragmatic, and say, well, you just gotta play the part. You just gotta act that way if you want to be successful. Instead of saying that and just simply conforming, I think it's asking questions about, why is this culture doing that? And is it something that I want to conform to, or does it go against my own values and my own beliefs? But that's a constant inner dialogue. I think that it's a privilege, but it's also a challenge. It's one of those both ands. You know, when you go to a new culture, it's difficult, but it's also a really beautiful thing. It's an opportunity. I don't know if I answered your question, but that was just off the top of my head.
Thank you, you did. Thank you very much.
Sure. Thanks for the question. Did I miss anything? And I'd be happy to share anything. I think the presentation will be shared or emailed out. I don't know if that's true from Lauren.
Yeah. Yep, I can be sure that it's shared.
And if you want to share my UC email address, that's great too. People can reach out to me. Anybody is welcome to reach out. Last call for questions, possibly. I know that we're getting close to stopping time. Got a few more minutes.
If there aren't any other questions, I think that we can go ahead and wrap this up. Thank you, Brody.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And as I mentioned at the start of the event, this has been recorded and will be made available to you all in a post-event email that will go out within the next couple of days. And we'll also be sure to include the presentation and Brody's contact information.
Yeah,
thank you all for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is like the end of my classes and there's 1 or 2 students left.
Yeah.
in empty chairs.
Well, thank you again, Brody. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yes, absolutely.
See ya. Bye.